Coercivism. It upsets my wife when I call government and corporate leaders criminals. So I went looking for a more neutral term. I decided on coercivist. It seems that people who will deny the charge that government officials are criminals would have to admit that they promote the use of coercion, and that makes them and the people who support them coercivists. The act of renaming something with a name that has a better connotation is linguistic inflation. And linguistic inflation will eventually be countered by connotative drift. When you say a rose by any other name would smell the same, that is another way of saying that connotation follows function. If I change the name of something unpleasant to a new name with a better connotation, the connotation of the new name will eventually become the same as the connotation of the old name. Linguistic inflation is as futile as monetary inflation. The market always wins in the end, much to the chagrin of government officials and others who would like to provide a rosy picture of the reality they are trying to sell. Remember when President Obama declared that the Obamacare mandate was not a tax? But perhaps we can use the word coercivist for a while before connotative drift sets in and the government bans calling its minions coercivists, as it now bans calling them criminals or terrorists, even though that is what they do. Language that does not reflect reality is useless for communication purposes and will not be used in general conversation. Such stilted utterances are too easy to defeat by humor to gain a lot of general traction, other than being the subject of jokes. Maps that do not resemble territories are not only useless, they are ridiculous. But perhaps there is still some utility in the word coercive. There are some coercive acts that are not crimes, and there are some crimes that do not involve coercion. If you commit a lesser crime to prevent a greater crime, then you have a positive balance in the scales of justice. This is not a trivial consideration and occupies a great deal of the discussion in the criminal courtroom. And it may be that we don't have any other kind of courtrooms except for criminal courtrooms. I'm not in a position to say, but I do have my suspicions. In theory, a society might also have a crime balance. If the members of the society contribute more in goods and services than they waste committing crimes, the society has a positive balance with respect to crime, and most probably a positive balance economically as well. In the 19th century, Americans led a life remarkably free of government coercion. There was no income tax, no sales tax, no DMV, no TSA, no FBI, no NSA, no AMA, and no ARPA. And yet, the country functioned quite well, even with a huge acronym deficit. Now, almost every commercial transaction is monitored and taxed by the government. Coercive transactions have skyrocketed, and non-coercive transactions are harder and harder to find. And the government is looking. The economy is not functioning nearly as well as it did in less coercive times. I don't think our society has a positive crime balance any longer, and our international balance of payments reflects that. When you go around the world killing large groups of people in order to secure cheap natural resources, you would have to be doing a lot of good to achieve a positive crime balance. But it seems that our society is leaning more and more to the dark side. We put people in jail for smoking pot. Putting a person in jail is functionally kidnapping. Everyone agrees that kidnapping is a serious crime. There is no such consensus about the use of cannabis. Kidnapping people for smoking pot is a serious miscarriage of justice. A society based on coercion is not sustainable, and change is coming. We really need to stop using violent means for punishing people we disapprove of, but who have not committed violence themselves. If you don't initiate force against someone, then the society should have no reason to initiate force against you. We shouldn't be putting people in jail for smoking pot, but we also shouldn't be putting people in jail for fraud and theft. I am not condoning fraud or theft. I am not advocating letting coercivist bankers continue their activities. But they shouldn't face the threat of jail if they didn't personally commit a violent act. But they surely don't have much right to complain if fraud or theft is used against them after they have used fraudulent means to achieve great wealth. The punishment should not be greater than the crime. Harsh punishments provide evil incentives for operators of the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system should not be a cash cow for the establishment. penalties that cover just a little less than the total cost of the crime provide both disincentives for criminal acts and incentives for victims to avoid situations that make them vulnerable. The 20th century was largely devoted to a violent struggle to determine what kind of coercive ideology would rule the world. Communism, socialism, fascism, and democracy were some of the leading contenders. We might be better off talking about whether we need a non-coercive plan, or at least a minimally coercive plan. I think a government-free society is easier to sell than a limited government society. A statist has to defend all the actions of government. A minarchist has to defend all the actions of government carried out by departments she doesn't want to eliminate. All the anarchist has to defend is the actions of ordinary citizens. It's true that ordinary citizens sometimes commit crime, but the state outshines all others in the field of coercive, rude, and boorish behavior. If you are arguing for minarchy with a statist, you basically are arguing with yourself. I think nearly all statists would like to cut some government programs. The Republicans famously want to cut welfare, and the Democrats want to cut defense. There are a lot of interest groups that have different visions of what a government should be, but in the modern world, total statists like Mussolini either don't exist or have very few followers. Statism is morally and economically bankrupt. We have done a dance of reducing statism to absurdity, and the results are truly frightening. Life in a dystopian fantasy can be hazardous to your health and happiness. The state is an existential threat to the human race. Even in the worst of times, freedom works. Even in the best of times, slavery sucks.